what is up YouTube, Kolst here. So I don't know if you guys have been watching, but Arena's been in kind of a dark period the last month or so as there weren't really any changes. But now in the last week, we've had a bunch of changes coming to Arena, which we're going to talk about here. There's a balance patch today, and there was also a significant hotfix last week, which many of you guys are already aware of. So I want to make this video to just talk about all of that stuff. Now normally I would just talk about the Arena side, but I have actually been playing a lot of Constructed because of how Malignant Horror was for Arena, so I'll touch a little bit more about that side of it as well. Of course, we'll be focusing mainly on Arena. And speaking of Malignant Horror, of course, that is actually the first change we have here because this was the hotfix that came out last week. And the big update here is that Malignant Horror can no longer be drafted. A huge important change for Arena. Arena has already felt significantly better as a result of this. However, the thing is that they don't actually retire decks with Malignant Horror in them. So I've seen as recently as yesterday, I've seen people actually encounter Malignant Horrors. Mostly it only happens at high wins, but it could happen anytime still, so just don't be too shocked if you do see one, because even a month from now you might actually still see a Malignant Horror. The other note here is that Warrior and Hunter have had their cards buffed a bit as well. Higher draft appearance rates for some of their high performing cards. Warrior I still wouldn't really recommend. I mean, it's playable, but Hunter's actually pretty good I think now. So I think Hunter's like kind of middle of the pack, but you know, you still want to pick the better classes, which are Shaman, Death Knight, Druid, and Warlock, I believe, over everything else. Of course, if you're trying to win, if you want to have fun, then do whatever you want, right? And I'll just touch on it as well. There were some duels updates here as well. Tome Tampering and Shock Spitter were banned, and there was a change to the Cold Feet Pact passive treasure. So that's it for the first hotfix. Now let's get into this balance patch. So this was basically the huge first balance patch for standard for the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. They had a minor patch a month ago before they went on vacation for Christmas. But now this is, they said, this is the first patch where they had enough data to make significant informed buffs to the new cards. So there are mostly buffs here, but to be honest, as far as standard's concerned, the more significant stuff is actually going to be the nerfs, even though there were 7 nerfs and something like 20 buffs. But generally speaking, most buffs for Constructed just don't do anything, so the nerfs are going to be the much more significant things. There are a few classes being nerfed, but the one getting hit by far the hardest is going to be Rogue. So we'll just go right down the list here. The first card being hit is Wildpaw Gnoll. Wildpaw Gnoll is not being buffed in any stats or cost. I'm actually kind of surprised by that, because what they are doing to this card is making it so it only counts non-rogue class cards. So this kind of kills it for how it's been being used. You know, it's been kind of cheesed out via, you know, Potion Belt and Maestra interaction, but now it's just kind of dead for that archetype. And Gnoll is probably just a dead card right now, I think. What's funny about this though for Arena is that a lot of the time, if you somehow manage to make a Gnoll in some other class, now suddenly this thing is going to be 0 mana. It's actually going to be significantly better if another class family generates it, so that's something to note here. But you know, Gnoll was already pretty bad to draft. Not totally unpickable, but you know, you wouldn't really draft it anyway. It's not in the rotation, but just to keep in mind. For some of these cards, they're not in the current rotation, but you know, you just keep in mind for when it does rotate in, which it will actually next month. I expect the patch will be mid-February. It'll be a mostly standard, I think an entirely standard rotation. They've already announced that, so I think you have to watch out for that. Next one we have here is Sinstone Graveyard. Sinstone Graveyard at 2 mana was a pretty good Arena card. At 3 mana it's already kind of bad because you don't have the right synergy for it. So what it's happening here is it's losing stealth, which I guess as far as Arena really isn't that big of a change. Obviously it makes a difference. Yeah, as far as Constructed, like this definitely isn't going to kill the card. But yeah, just, you know, giving other classes more ability to interact. Honestly, I don't think this is a huge change, but you know, it definitely will make a difference sometimes. Next up, they have Final Showdown, which I won't talk about too much because this is not an Arena card. You cannot draft quests in Arena. I don't even think you can generate them randomly either. They're really destroying this card because this is a funny card because when you change this thing, like adding more card draw requirement actually gives you more discounts, so it kind of makes it stronger. But they're kind of killing the card with this change, I think. Because you'd have to be playing in a much slower deck because the first step is now draw 6. And the thing is that Demon Hunter just can't draw more than, like, I don't think they even really have abilities to draw more than 1 card per mana. They can, like, prep draws, I guess, to kind of do it. But generally speaking, like, it's almost impossible to even activate this before turn 6. So this is just going to make the quest too slow to be played in like the current iterations of Demon Hunter. So they kind of just kill that card. Next up, Sinful Brand. This was a card you usually wouldn't draft in Arena because all it does is deal face damage. So it's going from 1 to 2 mana. It was already bad at 1, so it's going to be even more unpickable at 2. But as far as, you know, Constructed's concerned, again, like, this is just making it slightly more fair. It was really OP at 1 mana. You'd be able to burst people way too easily. This just makes it slightly more difficult. It's not going to kill the card or anything. Moving on next to Shock Spitter. This was a 3 mana 2/2 Battlecry, deal damage 1+1 for each hero attack you've done this game. Now it's going to a 4 mana 3/3. There were some, I was seeing some people actually drafting this card in Arena. If anything, honestly, this card probably gets better for Arena, just having a slightly bigger buy. I wouldn't say better, but it's not really getting worse because you don't want to play it early anyway, and it's just, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. You're not doing like brand combos or multiple shock spitters, whatever, that often anyway. You know, that's the main impact of this for Constructed, is that you just can't burst people. You can't double shock spitter, or potentially brand double shock spitter on turn 9, whatever. That's just not really a thing anymore. So it just gives the other decks a bit more time to not die to these super quickly. And I had expected this might make Shock Spitter not the most popular way to play Hunter anymore. Beast Hunter is still really good, so I expect it'll be more of that, but, you know, we'll have to see. The last card here, and the first card actually nerfed in the history of the Death Knight class here, is Glacial Advance. This was 3 mana, deal 4 damage, which can go face, and Constructed will always go face pretty much. And your next spell this turn costs 2 less. Now the next spell this turn costs 1 less, so it was theoretically 1 mana, deal 4. Now it's 2 mana, deal 4. Just again, limits the burst potential available to Death Knight, at least in a single turn. And as far as Arena is concerned, I did not draft this card very often at all, partially because Frost is kind of the weakest type in Death Knight right now, so you wouldn't prioritize it, but also, like, you just don't tend to have that many spells, so this was often 3 mana, deal 4, which just isn't that good. And now, you know, the upside is just a little bit lower. But the thing is, since you don't have the spell often anyway, this nerf really doesn't do anything. So this isn't a huge change, but yeah, it is slightly weaker. And then I believe the last card we have here in the nerfs category is Astalor Bloodsworn. So Astalor is getting nerfed, thankfully, for Constructed, just because it was in like, it wasn't in every deck, but it was in like 60-65% of decks or something insanely ludicrous. Most decks just played it because it kind of does what it does better than anything else in the game. Basically replaced Sire to Nathrius in a lot of ways. But they're just making it slightly more awkward through making the Mana Thirsts a bit more expensive mostly. So instead of being Mana Thirst 4 to deal 2 damage, it's now Mana Thirst 5. Just makes it a bit delayed there. It also means, you know, if you want to play the next version on curve, you have to, like, you'd have to do the first version without Mana Thirst. Just makes it a bit more awkward. The second version is going from Mana Thirst 7 to Mana Thirst 8. And then the third version is staying at Mana Thirst 10, but they're just very slightly nerfing the damage. And so this will make it slightly weaker, like very slightly weaker in Arena too. Statistically, Astalor is like an absolutely insane outlier. It's like pretty much by far the best card to ever exist in Arena, and this is going to make it slightly weaker, but it's still going to be the best card in the game, basically. I say best card, but, like, you know, there's an argument for, like, Scourge and Marigar, but otherwise it's Astalor, right? And Astalor is a neutral, so it's in every class. And this is not going to make it... It makes it slightly worse, but it's still going to be the best card in almost every class in the game. And with that, that's it for the nerfs. We'll move on to the buffs. And as I mentioned again previously, a lot of these are not really going to make an impact in Constructed very likely, but we are going to feel, I think, all of these in Arena because they're buffing a lot of cards that were already strong, and now they're going to be even stronger. So there's a lot of them, so I'm going to go rather quickly, but Battlefield Necromancer, which was already a good card in one of the best wild decks, which is even Death Knight right now, is getting buffed. So rip wild, I guess. But yeah, so the Risen Footman is going from a 1-2 to a 1-3, which is also terrifying for Arena, because what would happen with this card is sometimes it just wouldn't die ever, and then you just get a bunch of 0 mana 1-3s, and then it protects itself, and then you just kind of snowball and win, right? Now it's just going to be It's probably not going to make that big of a difference that often, but you know, sometimes this will actually just make it completely win the game by itself. So I'm a little concerned about that one. And also, they're also buffing the other card that also summons Risen Footman, which is Bone Guard Commander. Also, one of the better Death Knight cards in the game, period. And now, you know, one of the weaknesses of it was that if you had like a Street Sweeper, for example, you could deal 2 damage AoE to clean it up. Now that doesn't even work, so if your opponent plays this and you're not, I don't know, a mage or something, then good luck, basically. And another card that they buffed, which was already one of the cards I was really prioritizing highly already in Arena as well, is another Unholy card, Unholy Frenzy. So this was 3 mana, now it's 2 mana. It was, you know, the one weakness of it was that it was a little bit slow, so sometimes, especially if you were completely off board, which doesn't happen very often as Unholy, but if that were to happen, then it's hard to really get full value out of this, but now it's just even easier to combo it. So I was already prioritizing this really high. I'm probably going to pick every Unholy Frenzy I see now. Moving on to Druid here, we have Wither being buffed. It's being buffed from 2 mana to 1 mana. I don't think I've ever actually, maybe once, I don't know if I've ever actually seen someone draft a Wither. I've seen a couple, like I've generated off of Sunwell and stuff like that, right? But usually you never saw this card. If you have a bunch of undeads, I guess this is pretty good now. So you might actually start to draft this a bit more. You just didn't draft it at 2 mana. So this probably makes it from a terrible card to a decently pickable card, I would say. But once we don't have such an undead heavy rotation, this card's still probably going to be pretty bad in most decks. Right now it should be pretty good now. To Priest here, a couple Priest buffs. First up is Bone Caller, card which is already very good for Arena. Now they're just giving an extra health, so it goes from a 4 mana 2/4 to a 4 mana 2/5. Taunt, Death Rattle, Resurrect a friendly undead that died this game. You always have undeads, not always on curve, but I mean, yeah, this was already a lot of stats for 4 mana, especially if you played a bigger undead that you could guarantee by not playing smaller undeads and then cheating it out. Like, this is just, it was already good. This card is just going to be even better. Talking about another card which is already good and it's going to be even better, we have Haunting Nightmare, because this was a 3 mana 3/3 that basically gave you a usually slightly delayed 0 mana 3/3, and now this is a 3 mana 4/3, so it fits vanilla trades, doesn't get traded by, you know, something like a 3/4 on curve, so big difference there. And then they also buff the token. The Soldier also goes for a 4/3. So buffing 2 attack on this card, very significant. It was already very good. It's now going to be like super auto pick. Last card they're buffing here for Priest is High Cultist Basilisk, going from a 5 mana 3/5 to a 4 mana 3/5. This was a legendary, but Battlecry, resurrect all friendly undead that died after your last turn. Not a card you saw super often, but yeah, I mean, this definitely makes it a bit better. Honestly, with this effect though, like, does this really matter? I feel like this just honestly doesn't matter. Not gonna make it too much of a difference here, but because I mean, I guess you can kind of just curve it if you don't have synergy, right? But otherwise, I mean, you're probably not doing this effect on turn 4 or 5 anyway. It probably just doesn't make that much of a difference, I would think. Next, we have a couple Warlock buffs here. Warlock already was one of the better classes in Arena. First one, Darken Drathier, going from an 8 mana 6/6 to a 7 mana 6/6. That is significant in one sense, because sometimes you would randomly generate 8 drops, a couple ways to do that, and now this cannot be generated. Yeah, I mean, as far as Warlock actually playing it though, that just makes it, you know, a lot more accessible. At 8 mana, it was really slow, like at least it healed you, so it kind of did it, but it was a huge tempo loss still. So now it's just, it's still a tempo loss, but less of a tempo loss, right? It's gonna be a lot more playable, so I think it was already good regardless, so now it's just going to be, you know, significantly more good. That's going to make it, I think, probably a mid to upper tier legendary, where before it was kind of mid to lower, you know. And the next card, adding to another card that, at least speaking for Arena, did not need a buff, Infantry Reanimator. This was a 6 mana 4/4 Battlecry, resurrect a friendly undead, give it reborn. Now it's going to 5 mana, so even at 6 mana it was an absurd amount of stats. The only issue with it was you just, you know, you needed to have, like, it was kind of okay even with a relatively small undead, like a 2-drop or something, at least stat-wise, but it was a little bit slow. Now, I mean, even just getting a 2-drop out of this for 5 mana is a lot of stats for 5 mana, and you wouldn't call it slow at all. I wasn't always picking this at 6 mana because, again, like, you didn't have synergy, it wasn't really quite worth picking over a lot of good cards, but now at 5 mana, and with the number of undeads you have, this is just always going to be good, I think, so you're pretty much always going to take it. Just basically going to be the case for a lot of these cards they're buffing. Probably not this one, though, because this one is, moving on to Demon Hunter. This is the one Demon Hunter card being buffed. Vengeful Walloper. This was a card, a lot of people probably don't even recognize this card because no one played it really in any mode. This was a 7 mana 5/5 rush. It costs 1 less for each outcast card you've played this game. Now it's going to a 6 mana 5/5. You pretty much just never pick this because you just don't tend to have that many outcast cards in Arena. At 6 mana 5/5, you know, you really only need 1 discount to make it like semi-playable, right? A 5 mana 5/5 rush is actually, you know, decent, right? It does make it quite a bit more pickable. I still, as far as Construct is concerned, I still don't see Outcast DH being a thing, but who knows, right? Moving on next to card that most certainly didn't need a buff yet again. And as far as Arena is concerned, Energy Shaper. This was a 4 mana 3/5 Battlecry. Transform all spells into your hand at ones that cost 2 more. They keep the original cost. This was already an insanely good card in Mage. There were really only 2 ways to win with Mage in Arena right now, consistently. Well, not consistently, but they're both high rolls. But one of them is to play a big spell and then play a bunch of parrots until your opponent stops moving, basically. The other one was to get a really cheesy and good Energy Shaper and high roll it. Now, it's just, this is a card you like automatically pick because random spells are good, especially once they rotate to standard. Random spells are probably going to get better, not worse. This is going to be a big staple of Arena Mage for the foreseeable future because there's just basically no reason not to take this. So yeah, you will see it a lot. Another card that's going to be a staple as well is this next one here, Vast Wisdom, which was a 3 mana discovers 2 spells that cost 3 or less, swap their costs. The problem with this card in Arena and Constructed too was that it's just too slow. You pay 3 mana up front and then you effectively, a lot of times, you know, you might get like 2 spells of roughly the same cost and then it's just 3 mana discover 2, which is just a bit slow. Now it's going to be 2 mana, which is a lot more accessible, but also you can play this, you can get like a 3 mana spell and even potentially a 0 mana spell, and then it's really more just discover 1 spell that's mana cheated in that case. In this case, you're actually gaining a mana rather than it just being the 0 mana discover. So yeah, it just makes the card significantly better. This card goes from one I wouldn't have really recommended picking to I'll probably pick it every time it's offered now because that 1 mana really makes a big difference, I think. Next up is Time Warden. This was a 4 mana 3/5 dragon. Until the end of your next turn, your dragons gain Taunt and Divine Shield. Now they're just making a 3 mana 3/4, which makes it, you know, a perfectly acceptable curve play. Which a lot of times it will be now, but also, you know, it's still functionally does the same thing. There is specifically the 4 mana Rush Dragon that you can now curve into with this, so that makes it a very significant buff in that way as well. That's a really good buff for Paladin. They're going to appreciate that a lot. And I believe these are the last changes now we have. These are all the warrior changes. There's several here. First one is Asphodon the Grand Shield. This is a card you probably didn't see too much. Some control warriors played it and Constructed, but wasn't super popular. It was a 3 mana 3/3 Battlecry. Cast a copy of the last spell your opponent played. Now it's a 3 mana 3/4 with Taunt as well. Yeah, I mean, that just makes this card really good, I would think, right? It's even in Constructed, I think. Any control deck's just going to want to play that. And in Arena, of course, it is a legendary, and not all your opponents are going to have spells, so it's not always going to be that good, right? So you'll still pick like a super premium legendary over this probably, but yeah, that definitely makes it a lot better as well, because it's just a super good curve play now, at the very minimum. Next up, we also have Disruptive Spellbreaker, a 5 mana, previously a 5 mana 4/5, now a 5 mana 4/6. This card was already, I think, one of the best warrior cards, which is not saying much. It's a very low bar. There are not very many good warrior cards right now, but it was already a pretty good warrior card for Arena. Now it's like definitely going to be like auto pick, right? It's a 5 mana 4/6 is a lot better than a 5 mana 4/5. Still not a on curve tempo play, but you know, close enough, right? I don't know how much of a difference this really makes for Constructed though. I mean, probably not a huge difference there. Next one we have here, which is a very significant change here, is to Last Stand, because this is, I think, out of all the changes, this is actually a more functional change to how the card actually works, because this was 4 mana, draw a taunt minion, double its stats. It was just kind of, you could obviously make it work if you just happen to draft a bunch of taunts, but you don't always do that, so it wasn't super consistent, right? But now it's 1 mana, draw a taunt minion, which is, 1 mana, draw 1 is always fine, assuming you actually have a taunt to draw, which you don't always, so there's always still that problem. But they're changing it so it's kind of like Flight of the Bronze. It activates on turn 7, where now on 1 mana it gets that double its stats. So this suddenly becomes, incredible tempo swing card. The danger again just being that since you do have to potentially wait even longer, I guess you couldn't really play 4 mana do nothing earlier on anyway, but now you do have to wait till turn 7, which again means you've drawn half your deck, so you might have, no matter how many taunts you've drafted, pretty much you could draw all of them. But generally speaking, this is going to be a good card as long as as long as you're not looking at your deck and realizing you're pick 20 and you have no taunts, right? Generally it makes it a lot. It's definitely a significant buff to this card, because most of the time it's functionally just going to cost 3 less than it was before, so pretty good. Next up, they are buffing Nelly again. Nelly's been changed multiple times, right? I guess the first change they did to it was actually fixing the bug that allowed you to see what the pirates were. But now, since they've adjusted Smite, they're actually willing to buff this card back up a little bit, so it's still the same stats and everything, mana cost, but instead of giving them a 1 mana discount, now they get a 2 mana discount. So it's going to be a bigger swing once, the pirates pop and you get to do everything and probably smite your opponent in the face and everything, right? So pretty significant change for Nelly, because, they're giving a extra 3 mana of mana cheat here, which will make it a lot more likely you can play all the pirates immediately. And the last change, I believe this is the last change we have here for the standard changes, is Remornia Living Blade. This was already a very, very good arena card. Again, they are buffing it so it has an extra attack, and considering, especially given that this card can attack multiple times the turn you play it, 3 times, giving an extra attack, it's kind of like giving it 3 attack, right? So it's a very significant change here. Also just lets it's just more reach. This is a lot of value. So very good buff for Remornia. You're going to pick it probably pretty much every time now. And so that is it for the standard changes. I've been talking. My recording's at 25 minutes, so I better finish this. I was hoping this would be a fast video, but there were just a lot of changes to talk about. And in this patch, by the way, so I'll just go through very quickly, there were some Battlegrounds changes as well. They're nerfing a bunch of the undeads, kind of inevitably. Looks like they're buffing some of the other tribes as well. I don't have too much interest in this, so I'm just gonna go this very quickly. Toxin going to 5, Tavern Tier 5, blah blah blah. Okay, a bunch of changes, and I just wanted to touch on as well, because there were a bunch of duels updates as well. Again, I'm not super familiar with duels, but for you guys, they're banned To the Front, that's the mana cheat warrior card, right? And I know there were ways to specifically combo with that. They're changing, it looks like they're buffing a whole bunch of the lesser used hero powers. They're adjusting a whole bunch of the treasures as well. Bitter Cold. Didn't they just nerf Bitter Cold in this patch too? I might have. Oh no, that was Cold Feed. Okay. They're nerfing Bitter Cold. Yeah, that was the one really enabling the Frost Death Knights. So that's a pretty significant changes. And they're changing, it looks like mostly buffing a whole bunch of signature treasures as well. Some of them are getting nerfed too, just a whole bunch of them. Yeah, there's too many of them for me to go over because I'm not super familiar with these. I don't know what any of them are anyway. So that is it for these patch notes. There's a couple, might as well mention that there's a couple bug fixes here as well. Oh yeah, they're fixing the bug. That was a really funny bug that they just completely randomly swapped the stats on Magister's Apprentice, which is the new Sorcerer's Apprentice. It was 2-mana 3/2. It makes your arcane spells cheaper. Speaking about that, I might as well mention there was also another funny bug where Sunfury Clergy randomly gained Rush, which is really funny as well. They fixed that in I think that was in this hotfix as well, yeah. So if you're wondering about that one, they did fix that bug too. But anyway, that was it. Thanks a lot for hanging out, everyone, in this video. Hope you guys enjoy Arena now with the changes, because I've been enjoying it again a lot more since Malignant Horror's gone. It's really incredible how much of a strain that single card was having on the meta, and it's still incredibly unpleasant to still very rarely encounter it, but at least it's almost entirely gone, right? You usually go, it's pretty unusual to even see one in a day now, so if you're worried about too much, just be aware it can still happen, but, you know, thankfully it's mostly gone. With that, I hope I'll get to do some YouTube streams now. I just haven't been streaming because I've been like trying to correct my sleep schedule. My sleep schedule is completely messed up right now, so not trying to stream in the middle of the night. So we'll see. I might do a short stream on YouTube tonight possibly, but otherwise I'll be doing streams mostly on Twitch this weekend, and then probably next week I'll really do at least like 1 or 2 YouTube streams again, and that'll hopefully be the schedule I more settle into. But yeah, anyway, thanks a lot again for hanging out, and we'll see you guys in the next one.